Hey everybody, it is a Dev Reviews here, and I'm actually going to make another little mini series for building games in Unreal and a little bit about the kind of programmatical um, way of going about things, if you will. So it's kind of like a 101 game dev thing, if you will. I didn't want to make a tutorial series where you just follow what I do to copy me to make a copy of what I'm making and you don't actually really learn how to do things yourself or kind of make your own custom game. So what I instead wanted to do was build a series in which you can kind of learn how things work and use this to really make your own game, whatever that might be, understand the processes themselves and how you can use them to your benefit rather than just a handheld walkthrough. So it's a little bit of a different approach, but that's what we're going to do. I have the Unreal Engine 4 or 5.4.3 here. It's the latest version as of right now, when this video is coming out, and I just downloaded it from the Epic Launcher. You'll have like recent projects, games, and all this stuff over here. We're going to use a template. Templates are just little projects that kind of come with some base code in them, kind of aimed at a type of game. There's a lot of different kinds you can use, but we're going to go with third person. That said, we're actually making a top-down game, but the reason we're not using top-down is because there's some functionality in third person that I want to work with versus with top-down. With top-down, you mouse click somewhere, the character moves over there. We actually want to control the character ourselves with WASD and just have a bit more of that kind of typical functionality with third person, and we're just going to tweak it. But that's where we're going to start. So go ahead and decide where you want your project to be. These do tend to be big files, so kind of make sure you pick somewhere that has room. If you have it on SSD, that's the best option. And then make sure your settings are just kind of the basics over here. And give it a name. So we're going to go with top down tut. Name it whatever you want to name it. And then create. When you create this, it will take a little bit to build. If it looks like it's stuck at like what is it, like 54% for a while, just let it be. It's just building like shaders and all that stuff, and it will build. Just give it a little bit. So I'm gonna do that. I'll meet you when it's done. All right. So when you load up, it should look like this. If it doesn't, try again. And you'll have your content drawer, which is this guy. If it's not already docked, just click on that, hit dock and layout. And you have, this is kind of everything you have in your project here that's organized by folders. So again, this all comes with a lot of kind of basic stuff that comes with having a template here. And let's just go over kind of what the basics are. So let's start with objects. Objects are, so Unreal is built in C++, and it does have a little bit of its own kind of personal pseudocode of sorts, but mostly it's the same thing. In C++, objects are an instance of a class that encapsulates data and functionality pertaining to that data. So it's basically, it's a class, it's just an object, it's a thing that contains something, right? In Unreal Engine, it's just anything that can be loaded into the engine. A material, mesh, images, sound files, basically anything that you could add into the engine. Even a font, a custom font maybe that you've imported in. And then there's also actors, which are very, very similar. But actors are they're an object that can be placed in the level. So cameras, static meshes, the player's start location, which is this little guy here. It's a start location. Literally just tells the player where to start at, is this point. It can be I mean, yeah, like any even this light source up here, right? So if you notice when I click on something, this changes. This is the details panel, and it gives me information about that. So he's got location, rotation, the scale of it, all sorts of information regarding it, and each object, if you click on it, it shows me the details. So as you can see, these are objects in the level that have information in them. This is the data, right? So it's kind of what actors are. So each bit of these data is a variable of sorts. So you've got So let's describe a variable. A variable is it's any sort of specific type of data. It can mean integer, which are whole numbers, floats, which are decimal numbers, strings, they hold lines of text. Some variables can be an array, which is really just a collection of the same variable type. So like I might have an array of strings, you know, that there's just like I've got like 15 strings and they're all stored in a single string array variable. In Unreal Engine, variables, some of them are more like references to kind of complex structures or data or even references to other actors. So for example, a reference to another actor like the character or a sound file. And to be clear, a reference is just that. It simply refers to that object. It is not the object itself, but rather it's kind of like a pointer of like this thing over here. One more thing, pointers are kind of their own thing. To be very brass tacks about it, a pointer is a reference that can essentially be empty or not. It's in the really simplistic terms. We're not going to worry about pointers here because in blueprints, which is what we're going to use, everything is pretty much just really references for the most part. So keep that in mind. We've got references. So for example here, where it says static mesh, this is a reference. It's a reference, if you look over here, to kind of like a location in my folder system. So if I click this button to go there, this is the object. So you can see I have this object selected here, this actor, and then this is the mesh of that actor. So my variable, static mesh, which is held inside of my cube actor, is this location. It's pointing to this location, which is this mesh, right? That's a variable that is holding a reference. Whereas these variables, these are a little bit more static. They're just actual raw data. And they're not static in a sense that they can't be changed. They can be changed, but they're static in a sense that it's not it's not a path to something. It's not a reference to something. It's actual just plain straight up data, right? So that's the difference between these. And that does matter later on, which we'll eventually get to that. But we've got our material here, which is basically just textures in our shader. We've got some information about physics and all kinds of stuff, so don't worry about that too much. Just breaking down what these things are. So this itself, they do have a little bit of built-in functionality, which is, you know, like if I change some of this stuff, it'll act differently because there's functions built into it through Unreal Engine's engine code, right? They have kind of some default information. But we're actually going to look into making our own functionality. So that would kind of beg the question, okay, well, what do you mean functionality? Well, what is a function, right? So a function is just a block of code that only runs when it is specifically called on. It can have its own variables, which are either statically set inside the function. When the function is called, it'll access those. Or it's data that can be passed into the function and then into those variables. So you could have a function that said something like move to this location. Well, I would have a vector, right? So a vector is just three pieces of information kind of here. This is a vector. It's got my x, y, and z. I would have a vector plugged into that move to function, and then it takes that location. It's like, okay, do the functionality here inside this function to move to that passed on location, right? And that may sound a little weird out of context without having visuals, but we'll get to that. Alright, so let's open up the character. So if I go into third person, blueprints, I've got my character blueprint here and my game mode. Controller I think is just default, which we'll get to that later. So the character is kind of where we're storing most of the basic character data, like how to move around, some really simple stuff related to the character. So let's open that up. And again, since we're using the Unreal Engine template, it gives us this cool little basic setup. It's got a capsule, which is kind of our character's major kind of collision and just encapsulates the entirety of the character itself. It's like the root. Everything is attached to that. If you close this, you'll see that everything is attached. This is just the movement component, so don't worry about that. But everything's attached. I've got this arrow, which basically just tells me what direction I'm facing. You won't see that in the game. We've got my mesh, which is this neat little mannequin lady here. And then I don't know why it's doing this structure. It's something weird with 5.4.3, I guess, but we'll get to that in a minute. And it's got my camera boom. My camera boom is this kind of little line here. So if I select this, it's a spring arm, right? You can hover over it and you can read what it does. Um, it's really great for like if if I'm turning around, like if my camera kind of goes into the wall, instead of doing that, it'll spring along this line towards my character so that the camera doesn't disappear into the wall. I can change the length of it here with this target arm length over here. Control Z out of that. And this is the actual camera which is attached to that. And the camera is what you're seeing. So as the player, this is what you're seeing, right? Well, first of all, I'm making a top-down game, so really we might want to change that a bit. But we don't want to look at it from first person or a third person perspective. So we'll get to that in a minute, but first what we do want and why we decided to do this, and we're going into our event graph over here. You can, if it's not open tab, just click on it right here. So what we do want to see is the functionality, because that's what we're talking about. So if you look at here, each one of these red guys, these are events. An event is very, very similar to a function. And you can also call functions from an event. So let's see how we want to break this down. So this is our input mapping. This is basically just stores kind of what sort of input we're doing. Do we have WASD? What are we using for our input? Maybe our mouse, stuff like that. We'll get to that probably in the next video. But I want to just do the basics. So if I look at my camera input, sorry, my scroll wheel's broken. If I look at my camera input, I have this event here. And an event is, they're standalone processes that they will run and they don't return anything. They just run something, right? They run independently of other processes. So for example, if my camera, if this is being triggered because I'm looking around with my camera, I can also move around. You see this guy. I can do both of these at the same time. They're independent of each other, which is really important for something like this. So they're independent, kind of like functions that, how do I put it? They can be triggered by something such as begin play. So when this game starts up, when the game starts up, they get triggered here, and then it immediately assigns that input so that I can move around. Okay. But this one is triggered by if I, use my mouse. If my mouse is moving around, this gets triggered. See that? It gets triggered and it's telling me, okay, take the X value of wherever my mouse is and have me look that way. Right? This right here is kind of like my look. And take my Y and have me look that way. So if I'm looking over here in the corner, right, which is kind of like X and Y, it's going to rotate my camera X that direction, Y this direction, and put me right in that little point in between, right where I want to be. Right, and then for movements, I'm getting my WASD. This is a little, I'll go over this a little bit more in the next one, when we're going over what input is and how that works. But basically, it's kind of the same thing. I'm getting my X and my Y values from hitting, so let's say W is X positive 1, right, if I'm holding it down. If I'm not holding it down, it's 0. Well, let's say S is X negative 1. So W is plus 1 along the x-axis. S is negative 1 along the x-axis. So I hold W, I go up, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. Because as long as I'm holding it, it's going to keep doing it. Plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, I keep moving. And if I'm holding S, it's minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, minus 1. I'm going down. If I'm not holding it at all, it's 0, so it's not going anywhere. It's plus 0, which is nothing, right? And then Y would be like, say, left and right. So I'm actually doing that backwards because the X is the left and right and the Y is up and down, or forward and backwards. But you get the gist of it. So what it's doing is it's getting my controller's rotation. So it's basically like, okay, well, what direction am I facing? Because if I just want to go purely X and Y, well, what if I'm facing to the left? And I hold W down and now I'm, strafing basically off to the side. We don't want to do that. So we want to say, like, we want to move in comparison to where we're facing, right? I want W to go wherever I'm facing, not just directly, you know, north. So we're getting our rotation, which is where we're facing, right? Which is being fed in from our look. We're getting our rotation. And don't worry so much about this right vector, but basically we're just seeing like, okay, how do I put it? Basically, am I going right? Am I going positive right or negative right? Which negative right just means left, right? So it's getting that rotation, and we're adding movement according to that. So getting the direction where we're facing, and then am I going +1 in that direction or -1 in that? Am I going forward or left or right, I suppose? And this one, am I going forward or backward, right? Based on my forward. So which way am I facing forward? And then add either +1, -1, or 0 to that. So hopefully that makes sense. Then we've got another great example, an event versus a function. An event is triggered here by jump. If I hit spacebar, which is assigned to my jump input, I have this cool little function that comes right with Unreal Engine called jump. Usually you want to kind of customize this out, or you could even make your own jump, which I usually do. But for what we're doing here, it's fine. So either I hit the button, I jump, and then when jump is completed, so when this finishes running, or when I'm when I'm done holding it down or what have you, it will stop triggering jump, right? And there's a lot of ways you can customize this, but this is fine for right now. So you see we've got basic movement in here, we've got basic kind of camera stuff, we've got some input stuff going on in here. It's great for a start. Alright. So let's go ahead and just how this is by itself, let's give it a play. So if we go up here and we hit the play button, that'll let us play it as it is currently in the game. So if I move my mouse around, you can see I'm looking around, we can know where that input is coming from, right? How that works. If I hit W, I move forward. If I hit S, I move backward. If I hit D, I go left. And I hit W, I go, or excuse me, if I hit D, I go right. And I hit W, I go left. Now, if I turn my camera, W, you can see how that functionality is working. I am giving that control rotation, right? And then I'm adding +1 in that direction. If I turn around, +1 in that direction. If I hold S, it's -1 in that direction. It's -1 in relation to my camera. Notice the character is moving not in space so much as just anywhere. They're moving towards my camera when I hold S. They're moving the opposite. It's -1 of where my camera is facing. If I hold W, they're moving +1 of where my camera is facing. So that's the actual functionality at work there. That's the logic, right? Doesn't want me to escape like the normal way, so hit stop there. Usually you can escape out, but I think I have my settings where you can't. So F8 will let you exit out of it, to where you can just kind of stop being trapped in the character, and then at F8 to get back in. So you can see here, we're getting our camera input. We're letting us look left and right. We're looking left and right here, and then we're getting that left. We're getting whatever that is, and adding +1 or -1. And we're getting that forward and adding +1 or -1. So that's the actual functionality behind it. That's how that works. So if you wanted to swap that out some other way, you would think about, okay, if I'm using my camera, right, I'm getting my control rotation. And the reason I don't want pitch is like if I were to, I don't know, start somersaulting or something like that. You don't want that. You want that to be 0, because this keeps me stood up straight. If we plug that in, I would start rotating in all kinds of weird ways. So this is literally just, you want to keep this at 0 so you keep standing up straight, so that you're not rolling like a ball. And then this is, which is kind of, if you read these, it kind of throws you off, but that's really what it is. So we get that rotation. We get the right vector, which is basically the right facing. If I were to look to my right, and then I'm adding +1 in the right direction or -1 in the right direction. If I'm going -1 to the right, well, that makes me go to the left, right? You know, say I have 35 to the right. If I'm starting to add -1 every tick, which this is doing, as I'm holding it down, it's running every tick, then I'm going 34, 33, 32. I'm moving the opposite direction. And then same thing again with the forward. I'm getting my rotation. I'm getting my forward vector, which just means looking forwardness, if you will, like me looking forward based on my camera. I'm getting the direction of that camera forward, and I'm adding +1 or -1. So that's the actual functionality here. And we can translate that really easily even into raw code if you think about it, because it's just basic logic, right? It looks kind of funky. You break it down into just the basic logic, it's very, very easy to understand. So next we're going to go over this part right here. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and add probably our first component. We're going to add an actor component. And let me just explain that a tiny bit, and we'll go over a bit more in the next video. So when I'm adding so this right here is an actor, right? Its parent class is character, which the parent class of that is it's an actor type. If I want to add, let's say, abilities. Let's see, I can use multiple abilities where I've got an ability called basic attack. I've got an ability called throw grenade, whatever. Well, I could program all that in here, but as you can see, blueprints are kind of big and they get messy really fast. So what we're instead going to use is something called an actor component. A component is a little actor that you add to another actor that has kind of its own information, its own data, and even its own functions, right? So if I want to have a bunch of abilities on my character rather than loading this all up with a bunch of junk, it's not very modular that way. I'm going to add components to it on the fly. If I get an ability, I'll just add a new component that represents that ability. And then if I lose that ability, I can just take it out. I can upgrade those, I can change them however I want, I can have as many of them on as I want, and I can assign them to things. So that way they'll have their own data. So you can see here, this movement component, it has all its own data. And we're accessing that here with these functions. These functions are connected to this component. And you can see that we have all of this functionality that I can change if I want that's on this component. I can change all of this stuff. But none of that is kind of taking... Oh god, my mouse feels so busted. None of that is taking up space here. It's all kind of confined into its own neat little boxes. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. We're going to kind of start with adding input, showing how input works, and then we're going to tie that input into our new ability system. Alright, so if you're interested, go ahead and subscribe to this. I want to say I'm making this specifically for somebody. I'm not going to out them because that would be rude. But I am making this specifically for somebody who I want to support to the best of my ability. So I am going to tailor this towards that person, but this, in the end, can teach, I think, anybody how to genuinely build your own game, understand how to build your own game, and get that sense of kind of autonomy and control. You know, and learning how to program in a way that is sort of tangible and where it makes sense in gameplay. So that's kind of the intent behind this. If you're interested, again, subscribe. If you have any questions, if there's anything specific that you want me to kind of go over in depth, I will absolutely do so. Just let me know. And I will see you all later. Bye-bye.